Namaste and welcome to all the viewers to another live session on the history of our, you can say, our national movements, in a sense. So today, again, we shall be picking up some topics related to exactly how ideas progressed in India in the 19th and 20th century, particularly relating to nationalism. And we have chosen a very specific person today who we will talk about, who influences a wide variety of people. So this we discovered by going down a particular rabbit hole, and we will, yes. So today shall be discussing exactly what we found when we went down that rabbit hole. Yes. So before we start off, any thoughts from Rishi?
So namaste to audience and uh, partners over here. Mm. So I'll be mixing Hindi and English both for the ease of the audience, obviously. So अगर हम देखें कल ही हमारा स्वतंत्रता दिवस I think it's been 80 years since we have been independent now. The modern Indian state at least.
79.
79, okay. 80 साल हो गए। तो अगर देखा जाए in our previous iterations of podcasts, especially with regards to Renaissance, Bengal Renaissance, which effectively became an outgrowth of a movement all across India, as we know. उसमें कुछ प्रभावों को हमने देखा है बहुत करीबी से, जैसे कि मिशनरी आदि जितने भी पक्ष थे, तो उनके जो प्रभाव हुए हैं उन सभी को हमने ध्यान से देखा है। विशेषकर नेनर ने हमें बहुत ही डिटेल में अवगत कराया है कि which were the sections of British elite who were testament to many of the changes that we ultimately had in our own social life as well. Especially with regards to social reform, we can surely make this claim that Orientalism was the chief arbiter in that regards. पर एक प्रश्न उठता है कि क्या हमारा जो स्वतंत्रता आंदोलन का जो पथ था, क्या वो बिना प्रभावों के था? और अगर प्रभावों से ही प्रभावों की दृष्टि से ही अगर देखा जाए तो क्या वह विदेशी था या अपने देशी प्रभावों से ओतप्रोत था? So with that, with that regards, and I think we'll be continuing with this topic today. मज्जिनी को हम दिखाएंगे कि उनका प्रभाव कैसा था, और our chief argument, I guess, will be that he is probably the strongest influence on our independence movement. So yeah.
Yes, so basically on that same line of thought, we will be continuing that we are trying to decipher who were the primary influences on the minds of Indians in the 19th and 20th century. And as we have seen the influence of Orientalists through when we covered William Jones and the like, or and then missionaries when we covered, say, the you can say the Charles Grant types or the William Carey types. Many of them came later as well. Then there was, of course, the Indian reformers who started coming up in influence or as a reaction to these other outsider forces, such as Ram Mohan Roy himself. And such successive you can say repetitions kept happening on and on as a kind of a reaction and counter reaction from the Indian side each time over the years. So so yes, many influences came from outside during this period in the 19th century. One of them was Mazzini. So, so how we exactly came across him was in quite a different, completely different context. That when we read different people, we would come across him being mentioned occasionally, in a rather, you can say, in you can say, so all of them would basically glorify him. Nobody contested what he says. They were obviously read into the interpretations of him in different manners. For example, Gandhi mentions him. You can say Savarkar mentions him. All the revolutionaries practically were talking about him, and every single time it's just him, basically. Even the moderates, you can say, who one of whom we will discuss shortly, even he mentions him as a primary influence behind which, you can say, even the Congress was running. Yet the mystery is that we have kind of forgotten who this person was at all. He's not discussed anymore in our, uh, you can say, despite us being still nationalistic in a sense, he's kind of forgotten. So why is that so? We should try to find out today. So yes, so here is a puzzle that we wanted to talk about. So everybody should know that there are, of course, two strands, or there are multiple strands in the Indian independence movement that did not agree on various things. Two particular strands that we can highlight were one of Gandhians, Gandhi and his followers, basically from the Congress, and obviously the ones who avowed non-violence and the like, their Gandhian principles, basically. And the other side was, of course, the Hindu revivalist or Hindu nationalist, you can say, movement behind the Hindu Mahasabha, particularly running behind Savarkar, or you can say even organizations like the RSS. So, what we find interesting is, despite them disagreeing on practically everything, you can say, under the sun, except the fact, of course, they both wanted independence, they agreed very well on Mazzini as someone to admire and someone to bring about as an inspiration in their actions and deeds. So yes, how did it come to be so? Because it was not just Savarkar or Gandhi. As we will see later, even someone like Bhagat Singh was writing about him. So yes, that is we. I'm not going to tell exact right away everything. So just hold on to that question till we get to the answers. So yes, Rishi, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, at least for the audience, it will be very exciting revelation because the scope of influence which Mazzini had across the belt, especially among the educated class of the then India, with its varied dissertations and interpretations of one single man, it's mind-boggling to some extent. And as Nainer has pointed out in that very amazing slide, that how can there be an agreement on that one person um, when the participants who are saying on that one person are of both two different distinction. One is a pacifist and one is a alternative, what you could say, a violent revolutionary. So the kind of influence Mazzini had, it's marvelous, and we'll get to see that in our upcoming
Yes. So
slides right now.
exactly the nature of why Mazzini was admired by both, that we should also see, despite the, we can say, the sheer differences in the view of his admirers. So
Yep.
yes, right. Let's start off with the life of the guy who we're discussing itself. So Giuseppe Mazzini. So he was born in Genoa in Italy in 1805. That was basically the time of Napoleon's conquests in Europe. So Napoleon had basically swept over all of Europe through Germany. He was reaching even Russia a bit later. And interestingly, his father, Mazzini's father, he was a university professor himself. Being a university professor, of course, he was acquainted with the politics of the time, and he had a sort of strong sympathy with the French Revolution. So he was well acquainted with the radical politics of the era, and he passed on that acquaintance to his son as well. His mother was uh, for sort of opposite temperament. She was very religious, on the other hand. As you know, that Italy was a much more Catholic country throughout its history, given that Rome and the Pope were right there. And um his mother, she actually believed in a particular strand of Catholicism, which was called Jansenism, which which basically disavowed institutions in some sense and also rituals in favor of, you can say, the more purer Jesus. And you see this kind of attitude in a lot of different sects. So it is not something new entirely. So that these two views you can hold in mind, that they were the ones who later influenced his politics as well. So he's quite a sharp kid. He does his university at 14 uh, or so. He completes it, which was also young by the age of those days. After that, he notices that the whole chaos in his country and everything after the Napoleonic, you can say, Napoleon was exiled and so on, and he sees a lot of you can say a resistance to the Austrian occupational forces, which was being crushed by the authorities and so on. So at that moment, it was when, in the influence of you can say French Revolution ideals, that Mazzini felt like his country was being occupied, and that they should fight as a country in the same manner the French should fought for theirs. So he decided to get involved. He joined a secret network called the Carbonari, which was basically an underground revolutionary network, which was basically participating in violent activities to overthrow the occupational forces of the Austrians. And the cut short, it doesn't really go well for him. He gets betrayed by some of his colleagues. He gets arrested, and he's put for 6 months in prison in a fortress in a town called Savona, the one which you see in the image. That is the same fortress. So, something that was of interest to me is that in that cell, for those 6 months, he basically had to read just a Tacitus. He read Byron, he read Shakespeare, and the Bible. So, basically, just these particular influences he repeatedly read, and it probably got to his head in some manner. So that would have been another great influence on his mind. And in that jail cell, basically, the ideas for the movement he was about to found, those were born, basically. So, yes, so the moment he founds, before we start off with the movement, so you should take a look at the map we have here. This before Italy became one country. So you have Switzerland and France in the north and west. You have Austria, which was basically running over a large portion of the country at that time, with the collaboration of the Pope and the Papal States, basically. And there were patchwork of monarchies here. North In the north, Sardinia is there. In the south, Sicily is there, and so on. So it was quite a mess. It was not exactly one country on its own. So this map is what Mazzini basically spends the entire adult life trying to undo. So, yes, all the work he does in a young Italy, um, he goes into exile. He works from he has to go into exile. He has to even collaborate with the French against the Austrians to kind of liberate. He has to at times even make contacts with the different, you can say, the kings of various countries, within Italy, basically. As I mentioned, Sardinia was one. So there was a huge whole process which was called the Risorgimento, which also translates as rebirth or resurgence of Italy. So yes, and one of the consequences was in 1848, as we all know, that there was a whole bunch of revolutions across Europe which tried to overthrow the old authorities. One of them happened to happen in Italy. The result of which was that in 1849, it was so successful that they actually chased out the Pope, and Mazzini was able to successfully arrive and even be called the triumvirate. So there was a very shortly lived experiment where they made a republic, but that republic was eventually overthrown because the French withdrew their support and the Austrians came back from the north, basically. And this is where basically Mazzini goes back into exile. His and his life kind of fades out in a sense. He is no longer in charge of the movement which was uniting Italy. That is passed on to others he collaborated with, such as Garibaldi, who we will briefly discuss a little bit later. So yes, now we speak a little bit about the ideas of Mazzini, basically his gospel. So this is probably the most interesting bit because most people, if you have heard of Mazzini at all, you just know him as the unification, the person who advocated for the unity of Italy, or just the nationalist guy. But that is kind of underselling himself because he himself was not thinking himself as a politician in a sense. He was also seen quite a bit as a moral teacher. So it was not just the political manifesto which he even made, which is called the Duties of Man. So it, as you can guess from the name, it reads less like a political pamphlet and more like a scripture for those working on revolutionary movements. So in that book, he tries to lay out this whole ethical worldview, almost like a religion in a sense. And yes, so there were a
Okay.
few points here that I wanted to discuss. Yes,
Mhm.
Rishi, you can bring up the first few, then even I'll add my own.
Okay. So I'll start with the first point, duty over rights. So as Ninal
Ah,
has described right now, there is this book of his, which obviously he mentioned it, and uh, in that there is this large section where he goes deep down into this topic and comes out with this conclusion at the end. It starts with this. So his thesis starts as enlightenment led to attempts of achieving or achievement of well-being, because he postulates that the philosophers of Enlightenment era, according to him, posited that human beings were uh, born of happiness, and they therefore had the right to seek that happiness with utmost power. And to quote him, he says that nobody could hinder it, but the individual could uproot any of the obstacles in the path to achieving happiness. Unquote. And then he goes on to explain that what actually led to that situation. So he talks about how many governments, so he's not naming them, but he alludes to such movements such as French Revolution, and to governments such as in England, where it was a bit more peaceful, I guess. Although it was not very peaceful, there were many wars in between. But um, with regards to for a French Revolution, yes, it was very much peaceful. So eventually, both of them led to the same conclusion of attainment of rights of men. And in that, he says, to quote him again, or paraphrasing him, although the rights were achieved of men, but conditions never improved at all. Rather, it achieved more deterioration. Although material and social condition did increase, commerce, due to well organized operations, led to a powerful state itself. Transport of goods became so easier that prices of goods also became less. So he talks about how social and material prosperity did increase, but people were still in uh, utter dejection because the hope that was given by those philosophers, according to him, especially the ones who were talking about rights, um, that everyone shall attain happiness. But his contention is that uh, acceptance of right did not reduce pain and suffering of the masses. Advancements have not gained the same as well. Concentration of power and consumption, in fact, has been relegated to certain section of the masses, especially the powerful ones who have access to resources. Uh, and that he says that it has created much more problems, in fact, in those societies. Uh, Therefore, moral decay and so on and so forth. He goes on. So, to challenge that, he says that the remedy is education. That's his position, uh, to mitigate the inequality between have and have nots. Because there is always the clash of rights, and these clashes can be solved by appealing to something above it all. So, that's his postulate, which he brings up again and again, that you cannot justify um someone to be conscious of the other by appealing him to rights itself. It should be something above it, above the whole declaration of rights itself. And then he goes on to say that an individual can rebel based on his own rights. He Actually, he gives a scenario of this, that let's take an individual who rebels based on his rights against the society itself. Um, Using the doctrine of rights, uh, answering to him, aka the individual, is totally impossible. Majority alone under this declaration of rights can't compel an individual, since that is against the doctrine itself. French Revolution, he even goes deep into it, how French Revolution actually, according to him, only posited two kinds of thought processes. One is that of liberty, uh, which he posits that it was derived from pagan world, from the Roman era, and from Christianity, the idea of equality itself. And that's it. That's all that they did, that they posited those thought processes in their own society, but beyond that they could not go at all. uh, so his
So
contention.
basically, uh,
Yeah.
so his how he builds his theory from here is that instead of starting with rights, he brings up that he wants to start with duties. So so he rights is basically, as you know, what do I get to do? The permissions I have. So he reverses that. He makes that he starts with duty. So what do I owe the system? And when you ask that question, what do you owe in the system? He answers that you owe something to humanity. So the larger the goal in this, he the thing which is larger than the individual, the larger than the liberty, individual liberty or individual right itself, that he always posits that is humanity. That's why as well, as you can see, I've mentioned here, the concentric circles of obligation always have humanity at the top in his vision. There's a line of his as well where he writes that we believe in humanity, the sole interpreter of God's law upon earth. So he believes in a collective conscience which actually accesses that law together, while also you can say you can individually interpret, but against the standard of the general conscience of humanity. That is his view, in a sense.
Hmm. He says it again in one of the lectures, sorry, in one of the writings that he has produced. Rights are
Hmm.
assertions of individual, whereas duties are submission of individual to a common goal, as he says. So, as Nainer has explained, that is humanity, the human. I think it's progress of humanity as a whole. That's the point that he wants to bring in. Yeah.
So over this, someone might ask the question that if humanity is what matters really to Mazzini, why was he such a prophet of nationalism of all the things? Because as you can see, a nation comes below humanity in a sense. His answer was that he believes that nations exist in the same manner that division of labor exists. That if I literally paraphrase him, he believes that God divided humanity up into natural groupings based on their geographies, which make them suitable for different things. So he doesn't believe that nations are random administrative units with random borders, but they actually have a God-given assignment in that land to work to the same purpose for which the rest of humanity does.
Yeah, so he believes that everything is part of a bigger plan, and people have been put into different nations with a
Mm.
purpose behind the placement. So each
Yes, he
nations and
even
their nationals serve a part of a greater purpose, and therefore they must
exactly.
have, yes, right.
His definition of country also is interesting. I have noted it elsewhere. So he writes, he says a country is uh, quote, I'm quoting him directly here, a fellowship of free and equal men bound together in brotherly concord of labor towards a single end. So focus on that single end. That is the important part. So it's not about, you can say, race, ethnicity, anything. It's not about a monarch or even a flag or a territory. It's, as you can see, that brotherly notion working towards a
Yeah,
single end notion. So it's about equality and it's working about shared works toward a shared
and
goal.
he does see humanity as a common race, so that is there.
Yes,
Humans
he
across
doesn't
the
see
world as
any
a common race.
race
Just
as a concept
yeah,
at all.
yeah,
Yeah, he postulates that whole notion from Christianity. In fact, he says that at least that's his historiography, that Christianity brought the idea of supposedly duty for all humans because all humans have same nature as they are all mm, sons of the same God.
yes,
So
created in
from that,
God's
Yeah,
he's,
image.
they're
So
created in the
that's it.
image of
Image of
God.
God, exactly. Yeah.
That is,
So that's why.
they bring up that a
yep.
lot.
So I would like for the audience to note these nuances because it will be very important for us when we'll go deep down into our own people and their reflections as well.
Yeah.
So another aspect I wanted to bring about his ideas is you see this repeatedly in parts of his text where this should be relate to a part we will talk about later as well. He says that there is no country where w- wait, what does he say? He says there's no true country wherever caste privilege and inequality exist. So now to be precise about it, when Mazzini says caste there, he means European aristocracy. He's not talking about the Indian system in a sense. So that must be kept in mind. But you can probably guess where this is going. That if there were Indian readers, Mazzini, they would interpret this with their society in mind in a very, very strange manner, conveniently to their reformist attitudes. So, yes, that is one thing to keep in mind.
That's
So, yes, bringing it all together, uh, it's about duty before rights, humanity as a big highest thing you are loyal to. Your nation is part of humanity given a task by God Himself. And yes, that kind of ethical teaching is basically the essence of Mazzini.
By the way, I would like to question this. Doesn't he also say that a nation is apparently a workshop of all collective individuals with similar set of mindset who are working together for attaining progress for the whole of humanity?
Yes, he does say that. That is the same, basically the same meaning. He
Hmm.
believes that to be a division of labor for that geography. So that geography also works for the good of humanity, the as a God's commandment, but in that geography specifically, basically.
True.
So
Yes, he
his
literally
derivation is
believes
that
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 nations
is why
exist,
that geography should be united.
and he kind of believes in the status quo of nation geography as well. So, like, nations were made the way God wanted them to be made. So he wants them to remain the same and people to continue serving a particular purpose in the greater game. So
Yes,
we can, yeah, you could possibly infer that such beliefs follow logically from his position.
Yep.
So any other thoughts, or shall I continue?
Uh, on his position from self to humanity, I think he has always made this clear, right? That even though he does agree to liberty, but he has always meant that liberty should always be underneath the collective good or the collective goal. So he's not very much akin to some of our liberals, I guess, with that regards. That he's not
Yes.
putting individual rights
So
sacrosanct enough.
in this manner, he does place the individual in a kind of secondary manner. So he's not exactly a liberal. You can't say he's a liberal properly.
True.
Yeah. Yes. So the next slide. So this is another thing that we have basically discussed earlier, that he there were two sides to Mazzini himself. So one was a person who was working in literal underground revolutionary organizations, um, taking secret oaths, decades of participating in armed uprisings, a lot of which failed, and a lot of people died around him as well. Um, it was also built on the model of the Carbonari, though uh, I'm talking about young Italy. But yeah, so that model is also one part of him. While at the same time, he is also a kind of ethical teacher, as we have seen. So people, when uh, when they talk about Mazzini, as we will see ahead, they kind of appropriate one side of Mazzini for their own, you can say, movements in India. So that is where the basically portrayal of Mazzini comes into picture. There is even a famous quote of Mazzini towards his, you can say, his revolutionary side, by and which is famously attributed to John Stuart Mill, that he was Europe's most eminent conspirator and revolutionist at that time. So you can imagine the gravity of that statement in those days, at least.
Especially coming from John Stuart Mill, it is a huge thing. And also, isn't this true, Niner, that Mazzini also has written in many of his letters that England was his second home, and he appreciated England a lot more than any other country, besides Italy, I guess.
Yes, he had a lot of friends in England. He particularly the Carlyle family, Thomas Carlyle and his wife, who actually hosted him there. He His revolutionary movement was partially running from Britain itself, and he was also being spied on by the British. I don't remember their intelligence agency, what it is named, but yeah,
Okay.
they were spying on him basically for the purposes of Italian. You can say whatever their interests in Italy. So
Hmm.
yes, he had a very deep relationship with England, and he also wrote in English, of course, himself. So he knew the language, and he was also, as we discussed earlier, he was very well acquainted with the literature of England. from an early age, having read Byron and Shakespeare and so on. So yes, that is there. So a quick word on how his story actually ends for him before we jump onto how it gets to India. So after 1948, when the experiment of the republic fails and he has to basically spend his decades in exile, he goes off to London. As you can imagine, it was his second home, just like Rishi just said. Technically, he did participate in attempt attempts to basically overthrow the authorities and return in several manners, but he was, of course, sentenced to death by Italian authorities several times, so he could not return to Italy until much later. And an interesting detail is that he was actually pardoned in a sense by one of the monarchs himself. So the monarchs who he disliked, and the ones who against whom he wanted to bring a republic, they were the ones who, in the end, kind of give him the pardon and allow him to return to Italy. He was even offered a seat to actually get elected to the Italian parliament, but because the Italy became a kingdom at that time, and you had to swear loyalty to the king as part of you can say being part of the parliament, he refused to do that. He was a committed Republican. He wanted an Italian republic and not a king to rule over the people. So that was one very Napoleonic, not a Napoleonic, more a French revolutionary type attitude of him. So yes, he gets arrested several times. He still continues writing his association with revolutionary networks and so on. And he dies in 1872 in Pisa, in Italy. And by his own account, this is the line that the viewers should listen to, should keep in mind that he'd spent his whole life trying to awaken Italy's soul. But what he actually found, once the unification had finally arrived, was not as a republic, but under a king, what he found that felt to him like its corpse, the corpse of what he was trying to awaken. So yes, that's the man and his life, the idealist, the teacher, the ethical, the revolutionary, and by the end, someone who didn't even really get the thing he wanted in the shape he wanted. So as we know, in those times, in the end result of the Risorgimento was that the king of Piedmont, Sardinia, got to unite Italy, and he formed basically the Kingdom of Italy with the help of Garibaldi and his red shirts, if I'm correct. So the end result was that since the kingdom formed, the Republicans like Mazzini were really unhappy with it their whole lives. Despite, of course, that Italy became an independent country. So yes, that is one aspect. So now on the diffusion of his ideas to India. So here's the detail that would surprise many people that they would hear it, that no, almost probably no Indian nationalist actually ever read a word of Mazzini in Italian. The way he actually gets to India is entirely through English, and it also makes sense in a way. He spends a huge chunk of his life in exile in London, and while he's there, he takes a lot of interest in British literary and intellectual culture, their world, and he even becomes personally interested in many of them. Thomas Carlyle, as we have mentioned, who writes on great figures of history, and he was a historian and a kind of journalist, as far as I know. He knew him personally. John Stuart Mill wrote about him in 1903. A bit later, an Englishman named Bolton King writes basically what is held to be the standard biography of Mazzini, which is pretty comprehensive as well. And that book and uh, and the writings of various other Englishmen was basically how Indians would encounter Mazzini in the first place. So this is how the Italian revolutionary basically filtered through their British admirers, lands in Calcutta primarily. As you know, all um, English, you can say European knowledge basically went through Calcutta and then spread to the rest of India in those days. And the timing matters a lot. That Mazzini dies in 1872, which is also coincidentally the same time Indian nationalism is actually beginning to take shape. So yes, they see that Italy has suddenly become an you can say a proper nation, a proper nation state with a whole country and everything they run. The people are running it at, and they have evicted the foreign forces. They kind of see it as a history lesson that this might be the successful model that we might want to emulate. So yes, that they a lot of Indians had that in mind. So yes, we get to patient zero. That's so patient zero, Surendranath Banerjee. So who is Surendranath Banerjee? Firstly, Rishi or Captain, would you like to add on this briefly? Maybe introduce him a little bit.
I think Captain should take the honor for that. He knows this. Okay.
Hello.
Okay.
So a little bit of an introduction from what I know of him. His father was Durga Charan Banerjee, who was a doctor. They, of course, so his son, Surendranath Banerjee, who we are talking of, he and Ramesh Chandra Dutt, and I think another guy, another famous Babu, they had actually become the first few to clear the Indian civil service examinations. So, but in some controversy happens after that, and because apparently they had misrepresented their age or so on, they they had not been allowed to. I think I don't know about the others, but at least Sunandan Banerjee himself was not allowed to enter the ICS. So he again clears the exam and then gets a position later. Then he also goes to London for pursuing his further studies and so on. I think he studies law there and something. And he also was a little bitter about the, you can say, the lack of Indian representation and the kind of racism that you can say the English educated Indians faced in those times. That was part of the motivations, along with a lot of, you can say, English educated intelligentsia. They were trying to imbibe the values and you can say the great figures that English admirers themselves were admiring. So he was sent but with the, you can say, no, by the inspiration of Ananda Mohan Bose to England to study the works of various liberal philosophers, among among which primarily he studied Mazzini there, and reportedly also Edmund Burke, though why he is labeled as a liberal philosopher here is a bit uh, unknown, but yes, that is the way his biographers write it. So yes, after that he returns to Calcutta. He gives a whole series of lectures, not just in Calcutta, across India. He goes about in Lahore, in I think in Agra or somewhere, Kanpur or something, Madras, so various places. Not Madras, Bombay, I think. And so some essays were like on the Sikhs. The one was on Mazzini. One was on, I think, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And yes, so the one on Mazzini got quite popular, and that was the first time you can say an Indian audience was very taken aback by Mazzini, and they were actually introduced to him.
So I'll just chip in here a bit.
Yes.
So as mentioned, uh, R.C. Dutt and Surendranath Banerjee greatly internalized a lot of the values that they obtained from their stay in Europe and in England in general. And a lot has been spoken about the impressions they formed. For example, R.C. Dutt's biographer mentioned that the contact with Europe and the impressions he gained there during the years gave to his earnest patriotic mind, and he saw Europe forging ahead in industry and commerce and yearned for similar progress in India. So, since they saw successful institutions flourishing in England, they hoped that they could carry these lessons back to India and maybe replicate similar institutions structures back in their country. That is how R.C. Dutt saw it. But Surendranath's admiration for England went even deeper because he clearly had an admiration for the way in which the British did democracy. So, what he writes is, to England we look for inspiration and guidance. We have been fed upon strong food of English constitutional freedom. So, yes, he saw the way in which England uh, treated its citizens as an ideal that Indians would should use as a template for developing their own values. We have been taught to admire the eloquence and genius of the great masters of English political philosophy. So that is something that we come to know about Surendranath's impressions that he himself has written. Also, we come to know that you mentioned about his work on Sikhs. So when he did go to Punjab, he interacted with someone known as Dayal Singh Mathijia, who also happens to be a very significant figure who sadly doesn't get represented much. So apparently, Surendranath Banerjee got a lot of help from him in setting up printing machineries in different parts of Bengal and Punjab that he could use in disseminating knowledge of democracy and democratic institutions among the interested people. Sadly, although R.C. Dutt and Surendranath Banerjee have had a lot written about them, not much has been written about Dayal Singh Mathijia. However, Dayal Singh Mathijia played the role of a very generous benefactor in Surendranath Banerjee's life. So his money and his support helped in Surendranath Banerjee's message to find audiences within India. And he voluntarily went about and spread Surendranath Banerjee among the common people. So, yes, this was what was going on.
Yes, so by the way, just a small correction. His name was Dayal Singh Majidhia, and
My bad. Yes,
as
Majid.
many would know that he founded a lot of institutions. I think he was the founder of one of the colleges or something there in Lahore and Delhi also, and probably some newspapers as well. So he was quite an
Tribune.
influential figure in those times.
Oh, yes. I think I
Yeah,
have the name of the newspaper here. Let me just look it up.
yeah, and also he found the famous Punjab National Bank.
Oh,
I think
yes.
he's one of the founders.
He and probably some of the princely states.
Yes, he founded the
Mhm.
first English daily, the Tribune from Punjab. So, yes, the Tribune was founded by him.
Yeah, the Tribune, which is still functioning today, if I'm correct.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
still
I think there are many
so. Yes,
branches also, right? Dainik Tribune and so on
Oh, yes.
of that same organization. Yeah.
It was founded by him and another famous stalwart over there known as Sir Pratul Chandra Chatterjee, who happened to be a practicing High Court judge at Punjab High Court. So yes, they were involved in the founding of these periodicals in Lahore.
Okay, so let me read this two excerpts, I think, for the ease of audience. They will get to know from Surendranath Banerjee himself as to what he was crediting himself of vis-a-vis Mazzini. Quote, Upon my mind, the writings to Mazzini had created a profound impression. The purity of his patriotism, the loftiness of his ideals, and his all embracing love for humanity, expressed with the true eloquence of the heart, moved me as I had never before been moved. I discarded his revolutionary teachings as unsuited to the circumstances of India and as fatal to its normal development, along the lines of peaceful and orderly progress. But I inculcated with all the emphasis that I could command the enduring lessons of his noble life, lived for the sake of others, his lofty patriotism, his self abnegation, and his heroic devotion to the interests of humanity. It was Mazzini, the incarnation of the highest moral forces in the political arena. Mazzini, the apostle of Italian unity, the friend of the human race, that I presented to the youth of Bengal. Mazzini had taught Italian unity. We wanted Indian unity. Mazzini had worked through the young. I wanted the young men of Bengal to realize their potentialities and to qualify themselves to work for the salvation of their country, but upon lines instinct with the spirit of constitutionalism. I lectured upon Mazzini, but took care to tell the young men to abjure his revolutionary ideals and to adopt his spirit of self sacrifice and devotion in the paths of constitutional development. I persuaded Babu Jaghendranath Vidyabhushan and Babu Rajnikanta Gupta, both distinguished Bengali writers, to translate into our language the life and work of Mazzini in the spirit of my addresses, so as to place them within the reach of those who did not understand English. I soon popularized Mazzini among the young men of Bengal. No dire consequences followed, for the conditions that create the revolutionary spirit were wanting. They are the work of governments that misread the signs of the times and not of the so called agitator or of the ardent patriot who works for the amelioration of the lot of his people. After a year's preparation, the Indian Association was established on July 26, 1876. The name was the subject of anxious consideration among our friends, Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Mr. Justice Dwarkanath Mittal, while still a member of the bar, had formed the idea of organizing a similar association which was to be the voice and organ of the classes. The idea had to be given up as it did not at the time meet with much support, but the name they had chosen for their proposed organization was the Bengal Association. We thought that such a name or anything like it would restrict the scope of our work, for the idea that was working in our minds was that the association was to be the center of an all India movement. For even then, the conception of a united India derived from the inspiration of Mazzini, or at any rate of bringing all India upon the same common political platform, had taken firm possession of the minds of the Indian leaders in Bengal. We accordingly resolved to call the new political body the Indian Association, unquote. So these are quotes from his own book, A Nation in the Making by Surendranath, as we know. It's a semi autobiography as well, along with his own interpretation of the events that were going on in late 19th century and early 20th century. So people can refer to that if they need to know much more in details. And
Yes,
also the
and
Indian Association, yeah.
yes, so one thing must be kept in mind that Surendranath was basically the representative of the moderate faction of the Congress. That is why you can see he basically explicitly disavows the revolutionary ideals of Mazzini,
Oh
while
yes.
just taking his, you can say, theories, his, uh, you can say, rhetoric, and so on. He disavows the revolutionary activity part immediately in the top.
Yes, so he is against the idea of any sort of agitation, but he likes the idea of sacrifice. So he kind of cherry picks that idea and tries to preach it to his target
Surprisingly,
audience.
Surprisingly, this
Yes,
attitude of Surendranath Banerjee was chastised by Aurobindo as a sort of Baniagiri. Maybe we'll discuss this much later.
Yes.
yes. So that is there. Any other thoughts on Surendranath Banerjee before we continue, or was that it?
So, have you seen, at least, have you to notice that how he's referring to the first thing that encountered him, at least while reading Mazzini, was that love for humanity, that collective goal issue, that the progressive religion of Mazzini, that was something really touching to him, I suppose. That's the first thing that he remembers in it as well, as you see, right? That
And
he talks
perhaps it
about the
helps him feel
injustice.
connected to the British as well.
That can also be connected to the fact that when he encountered, as I had discussed in the previous slide, he was sent to London to learn about liberal thinkers, and the first one he came up with is Mazzini, who is not exactly technically liberal when we go by the definition of the word. So he interpreted his own progressivism into Mazzini's, though Mazzini also was obsessed with an idea of progressivism in his own sense. But
Hmm.
yes, we can see how he projects his version as well here.
True, true, true. And Mazzini's progressivism is like, I don't know. Acha, maybe we'll discuss this much later. Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
Hmm. Any thoughts, Captain, or shall we continue?
We can continue from here.
Okay, so in so going vernacular from here. So up to this point, this has really been a Bengal story, so an English language story. So what happens next is that these lectures become very popular, and since Surendranath Banerjee becomes a part of the Indian National Congress in the coming years, that basically spreads like wildfire. All the lectures of his, you can say, these were basically the founding thesis of the Indian National Congress itself, in a sense, which we don't discuss so much in current times. So, uh, in the coming years, someone like Lala Lajpat Rai writes a biography of Mazzini in Urdu, which is also translated in Hindi later, as you can see in the image here, specifically because he wants young people in Punjab to read uh, the story of Mazzini. Then, a bit later, a young Savarkar who was sent to London. From London, he writes a biography of Mazzini, which he, of course, again encounters through his English education, through the English admiration and English literature on Mazzini. So he writes a biography of Mazzini in Marathi for the readers back home with his own revolutionary, you can say, attitude interpreted into it. So that will be discussed a bit shortly in a while. But yes, so in that span of 20-25 years, Mazzini has basically gone on from a figure who was admired by niche English language speakers to basically all the people who were engaging with the education system overall, even in the vernaculars.
True.
That that was basically the stature of Mazzini at this point. So, the analogies which land close to home in all this. So, you might remember, the viewers might remember the map which I had shown earlier of Mazzini's Italy, those separate kingdoms, the Austrian occupied territories, Pope's own little state sitting in the middle, which was collaborating with the foreigners. So, this, as you can see, is the map of British India. And there is a sort of parallel that we can see with this. It's a more dramatic and much more larger geography than Italy, that all of it was occupied by a single occupational force, and all the, you can say, kingdoms and all, they were all aligned with the uh, same occupational force all throughout. So if you were an educated Indian in those days and you read about the story of Italy, the story of Mazzini, the story of Garibaldi, would you not probably make the comparison with the map of your own country, because it is, it does seem that to an extent the borders of India were drawn quite artificially. So yes, apart from that, there is also the similarities in the ethical frameworks, which might resonate well with a Hindu ethical background, specifically the vocabulary around duty, placing your obligations to your, you can say, your nation. The obligation to the nation might be just interpreted in the same way a Hindu sees obligation to his community. So it really resonates in a very familiar vocabulary in a sense, and it doesn't feel like the cold foreign rights-based liberalism that Britain was popularizing at the same time, Britain and America. So it was kind of a language that people knew and kind of understood in their own sense, though it was also different from what they actually imagined.
True. Also, Mazzini's reference to God as well, I think that too had an effect, right, upon our thinkers as well, because some of them, even though educated, really detested atheism. So when they saw Mazzini and his reference to God and his criticisms as well of the atheist, as they said, as Mazzini used to describe them, right, as idolaters of material interests or Machiavellianists and so on. I think those also really affected our own thinkers as well to adopt him rapidly. Don't you think?
Yes, and as we know that there was a sort of dejected attitude towards our religion in those days, that everyone was kind of trampling down upon it. So this sort of validation would have really raised their spirits in a sense.
Totally.
Precisely. And as Surendranath himself, like he must have been fascinated by the idea that okay, the very people he admired saw humanity as a connected race with connected goals. So it helped him feel welcome in their midst there, I suppose. And he tried to spread the same message here and inspire those people who were just waiting for that very chance to feel connected to the people they admired so much, the people they aspired to be.
Yes,
Brilliant point.
very much so. So yes, moving on to the next slide. So this is the template. So it's not basically only the stories and the ideals that are copied, but also you see repeatedly that entire organizational structures and naming schemes, they were copied, and not just once, more than once, repeatedly, one after the other. So Mazzini starts his organization called Young Italy back in 1831, long time ago. So that is basically the template is of a organization, which is secret in its workings, but fairly open about what morals and principles they hold, and they are built around the fact that they work for a patriotic cause, and that they are willing to fight and die for their duty. Fast forward to many years later, so from Surendranath Banerjee's own, you can say, a book, we have also encountered the fact that he was in his speech encouraging the youth of Bengal, or youth of India in general, to set up young Italy's all over India. He wanted a lot of young Indias basically, and that did happen as he imagined it. So when we fast forward to 1904, we get Savarkar setting up something called the Abhinav Bharat, which is an organization. As people who are more acquainted with Savarkar will know that he had the organization called Hindu Mela before that, which he renamed to Abhinav Bharat, which became more explicitly revolutionary in its ideals. So the ideas were same, of youth as a youth organization, as a brotherhood of as a secret society, and to give that moral patriotic uh, cause and duty to work for. And then again later, you see among even the socialists that Bhagat Singh. names his organization as well, Naujawan Bharat. So you see the template of the names of the organizations as well. They always start with Young Italy. Yeah, Abhinav Bharat literally translates to Young India, which is also, by the way, the name of a magazine which Gandhi used to publish.
Yeah.
So the there are plenty of templates being copied around.
Precisely so. And yeah, as we can guess from here, Gandhi got the idea of young India from young Italy. So yeah.
Yes, it was also that attitude of Mazzini and those organizations that they wanted to rally specifically the youth.
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, even Carbonari was a youth organization. The organization that, the secret
I think so.
organization
Yes,
they were, yeah.
yes. It was
And there were so many others. I mean, even the
of
Tagore family
university
apparently,
students and
the Tagore
professors
family
as well.
apparently, Rabindranath Tagore, his brother Jyotirindranath, and others, they also had built the Sanjeevani Sabha, and the name itself says a lot. Revivalist. The Sanjeevani Sabha, that too functioned along the lines of Carbonari, as has been written. So they too internalized Mazzini's uh, secret society and kind of tried to replicate activities similar to what the Carbonari did abroad. So,
So yes, so it must be kept in mind that during the 1900s and even the late 1800s, all the secret organizations, secret societies, and all these youth organizations, they were always not just in India, even in Europe, even in America, they were modeling themselves actually on young Italy. It was such a
yes.
profound influence across the world.
Yeah, and even
So
today, black is associated with secrecy, right? And Carbonari literally comes from charcoal. So yes, there are a lot of
yes.
themes have been also been going around. Even today, in many places, we do hear that thieves come dressed in black. So it has become associated with, I mean, all sorts of secret services and espionage and so on.
There is also, with regards to Sanjeevani Sabha, as it was mentioned by a patriot here, uh, even that organization apparently copied some of the rituals of young Italy as well, like taking secret oaths and
Pledge,
symbolic rites and so on.
pledges, yes. So they had
Yeah,
pledges.
and
A
very
lot of
weird
things.
one.
Right? The protocols were copied
And people might know of
to foster a
societies like
sense of
the
belonging. Yeah.
Freemasons and so on, right?
Oh
So
yes.
there were among these secret societies, there were these kind of oaths where they used to draw blood and make oaths on blood. So that was the kind of passion they used to do it with.
Oh yes.
So for the audience, I'll just say this as well, and maybe both can comment on this. So many would start to believe that Rabindranath Tagore was somehow a revolutionary because he had to join this organization, but no, it was very much a sentimental thing for them to do such things. They never engaged in any revolutionary activities whatsoever. That's Sanjeevani Sabha. So that must be clear for all the audience, because there are some commentators, quote unquote, who try to make Rabindranath Tagore a revolutionary.
Huh. So moving on to the next slide. So here is where we actually get to the heart of the discussion today. That we have several different political movements in India, and pretty much every single one of them finds something to love in this Italian Republican, basically. So you've got moderates that we covered, Surendranath Banerjee's crowd, also to an extent Gandhians themselves being moderates, basically people who take the education, the lawful reform side of things, and they want that aspect of Mazzini. Then you've got the revolutionaries who want the secret society aspect, who want the actual young Italy activity and forming a, you can say, what should I say? actually working on the ground and so on. So those were the revolutionaries and how they interpreted Mazzini. Then you have the Gandhians, who are kind of shade of moderates itself, who also take more interest in the duty and self-rule part over the rights and self-interest ones. And we have Hindu nationalists who kind of find that you can say that reference to God, the reference to religion in Mazzini's writings a lot more important than the others do. And they kind of merge the idea of religion with nationality in a sense which was different from the others. So we should cover that as well. So starting off with the moderates, the or more better said, the idealists and the imitators. So the moderates are more like the imitators. So we have already met the moderates. That was Surendranath Banerjee's crowd, people who basically take Mazzini as basically a teacher, an educator, someone to uh, vaguely admire, and not to actually take as a blueprint to work in their lives. The revolutionaries are on the other side of things. They actually take Mazzini's life as a blueprint for how to act, whether it be Anushilan Samiti, you say even Abhinav Bharat of Savarkar, Bhagat Singh's uh, the HSRA,
Even
many
Anushka
other
Samiti for that matter.
yes, Anushilan Samiti as well.
They were
So
clearly, I mean, it has
this
been
was
documented
the
about
model
it.
of the carbonary being
Yes,
copied
precisely.
basically. So we even have a
And
reference to Bhagat Singh's letter.
we have the instance of Hemchandra Das Kanungo, who was a member of Anushlan Samiti, who also interacted with the Carbonari and some European radical nationalists who were associated with it, apparently.
Hmm.
So that was there.
And a kind of a, a reference to exactly how Mazzini resonated with the revolutionaries is best shown in this um uh, also excerpt from Bhagat Singh in his letter to Sukhdev. So this is quite a humane detail if you look at it carefully. That so he talks about Mazzini's very first failed uprising and how devastating that failure for him personally was, because even had the HSRA faced many trials, right? So they were writing about that. So Bhagat Singh writes that after the utter failure and crushing defeat of the first rising, Mazzini couldn't bear the misery and the haunting memory of his dead comrades. Bhagat Singh says that he would have gone bad, maybe even taken his own life, if it hadn't been for one letter from a woman he loved. And then Singh actually asks the question: does love ever really prove helpful to a man? And he answers it himself. Yes, to Mazzini it was. So he basically thinks that despite whatever has everything going to hell, there was a way of keeping all the things together. That memory of Mazzini to him kind of was so important emotionally as well. Yeah. So that was this one. Next, so we bring up Gandhi's Mazzini. So this is a completely different reading of the same man. This is Gandhi. So we have his book Hind Swaraj, where he writes. He has it in the chapter 15 of the book. He actually has a little bit of a comparison on the methods of liberation of the country that uh, different people took. The he contrasts Garibaldi and Mazzini basically. So Gandhi says that what Cavour and Garibaldi and you can say the Mona the King Emmanuel of Piedmont Sardinia, who what they built was a state, that was a kingdom with a king on the top. But Gandhi says on the other side we have Mazzini, and his vision was different. His vision was the liberation of the Italian people, and not just a change of who's sitting on the throne. Gandhi thought that we are just changing the throne from outsiders to insiders. That was apparently negative to Gandhi. So the for Gandhi, the distinction was basically that the idea of Swaraj was not about swapping the local king for the foreign king for a local one. It is something deeper than that for him. He says that he would want uh, he would want a sense of deeper freedom that even unified Italy in its form which he saw that had abandoned it.
Yeah, he wanted
So
like
that
agency for the people and the government, much like what
uh,
Mazzini wanted. Like he
yes,
was kind
they
of
wanted a
disappointed with
democratic,
Garibaldi
yes,
transferring
a
power from one
republican
ruler to another.
democratic structure basically. Yes.
So
So that is why he has this quote of his: the Italy of Mazzini still remains in a state of slavery. And so Gandhi is saying that that freedom after the freedom from a foreign country is not actually the one that matters. The one from authority is what that matters. Though of course that can be disputed.
So Gandhi was a Democrat, I guess, a Republican in that regards.
In a sense, yes. He thought that this was not, so he was contrasting with the word freedom, that this was not true freedom. The Mazzini's ideal was true freedom. That was what he was trying to do. So now we have another character, Savarkar, probably the favorite of our viewers as well, and the subject of much discussion in recent times. So Savarkar, just when he was sent to London, that is the time when he wrote the biography of Mazzini. And this book actually gets banned in India and stays banned all the way until 1947. It it was still in circulation across India at the time, but among, you can say, secret societies, revolutionaries, and so on, not in public in that manner. So the colonial government clearly thought the book itself was quite dangerous. The ideas were quite radical for its time. Um, on a side note, even Lala Lajpat Rai's book on Mazzini was banned. So Mazzini was quite a controversial figure to the British government. So yes, and now jumping forward to 1923. So this Savarkar kind of has elaborates in on Mazzini's ideas in a new way, in a manner that none of the other figures have actually elaborated before. So he builds on that same underlying premises of Mazzini's nationalism, that the nation itself is a kind of sacred, it's a moral community given guidance by God, and it's not just a legal arrangement with arbitrary boundaries and so on. He narrows the definition of the nation, and he also brings up the nation as a community of religion aspect of it to the forefront. This is something that the others do not do. And Mazzini does it several, a handful of times, not a lot of times, since he was a deist himself. But yes, we get to see a lot of glorification of Mazzini for this from Savarkar.
People will be very interested in hearing those excerpts because those are really crazy, in fact. The kind of praises that Savarkar has heaped upon Mazzini, it's unbelievable. Like, it's not even remotely very neutral. It's totally like someone totally devoted to that guy.
oh yes, he
This,
uses words like
in this
I think
manner,
you can
he
just
was
show them the
quite
screenshot.
similar to the emotionalism which Bhagat Singh showed. So I'll share my screen and show exactly
Totally, totally. This needs to be
Savarkar's
shown.
views on this.
Yeah, people, viewers needs to see this.
So this is an excerpt from Marathi. So this is the, you can see the Marathi translation, Marathi words on the screen, and I shall read out a translation by AI on in English. So the translation of this first excerpt is: where then? So this is in the preface to his translation of Mazzini's, you can say, biography, I think. So
Yeah, life
yeah,
and writings, yeah, both.
so he says, where then did the distinction remain? Mazzini freed politics from this hell-bound concept. He clearly established that politics is a divine duty. He argued that action, pravritti, and renunciation, nivritti, are not two contradictory principles, but rather the names of the two different parts of the same path. No, it is not true that there is a conflict between heaven and earth or that they are different. No, it is not true that the divine kingdom of the truth and injustice should rule in heaven, and falsehood and injustice should reign on earth. Earth is the ladder to heaven. So, the important point here is he clearly established that politics is a divine duty. As you can see in Marathi, he has written, Rajkaran he Parameshwari Kartavya aahe. So, probably that is the line which translates as that. So, that must be kept in mind. That is the first excerpt. Now, on to the second one.
In the meantime, I shall only say some small point about it. Please, audience, note the fact that deliberately Savarkar is using language from our own scriptures like Pravritti and Nivritti to make it suitable for the Hindu audience that he is appealing to. And he's also making it much more religious in tone.
Yes, so this is the second excerpt. This translates as so. Mazzini took to task the excessive religious bigots. It is necessary for religion to pay attention to politics. Not only that, it is religion's duty to be. It is a politics' duty to be part of a religion. Politics means the liberation from bondage and the development of society, one's own country and one's independent nation. To ignore it is to commit the unforgivable sin of silently watching a terrible calamity fall upon humanity. The true definition of religion is to sustain and support humanity. It is a hypocritical understanding to think that while humanity is suffering in the mire of slavery or immorality, we alone can free ourselves. So, yes, that is this excerpt. So the next
And
excerpt
audience,
is
please note how he has changed the definition of dharma to found akin to how, Mazzini talks about humanity itself. Yes.
Precisely.
this one is
Yes.
a little bit more
So he's
interesting, probably.
apparently trying to fit the Indian side. I mean, certain Indian words in Mazzinian frame, so he can accommodate the Mazzinian philosophy into the Indian
Yes.
framework.
So this one is a little bit interesting because he brings up the a comparison with someone, a very important figure in Maharashtra. So, such is the nature of brave. This is the translation. Such is the nature of brave men. Upon hearing the oneness of two principles, religion and self-rule, quotes Swarajya. In Mazzini's words, any Maharashtrian will inevitably be reminded of the Mazzini of Maharashtra. Now, who is the Mazzini of Maharashtra? Since holy men are born from a part of the divine, their souls are not different, and therefore their thoughts do not contradict one another. Only their names in different countries are distinct. The underlying principle remains the same. The Ramdas born in Italy is called Mazzini, and the
Oh
Mazzini
yes.
born in Hindustan is called Samarth Ramdas. Both preach the exact same principle. Politics is sacred only if it is religious, and religion is sacred only if it is political. The moment I learn that a certain man is religious, so this is Savarkar saying something. The moment I learn that a certain man is religious, the first question I will ask is, what has he done? What has he done, and what has he suffered for the liberation of the people? The moment that I learn someone is a human being, the first question I will ask is he a slave? Because one who remains complacent in slavery is not a human being, but merely inert clay, a mere atoms.
Just to just show the audience how he has equated Samartha Guru Ramdas with Mazzini, and Like he has totally, um, what should I say? Like he has totally collapsed the whole difference of context that they were born in and how they were dealing with their own times. Those distinctions have been totally collapsed by him, and this is the kind of equation that he's making between both of them.
Yeah.
And the
Which
final
is,
screenshot is on this one. Yes, you
hmm.
can continue.
Yeah, well, just some short point that which is very odd because Samarth Guru Ramdas was supporter of monarchy, unlike Mazzini.
So he was more akin to Chanakya, you can say,
Precisely. Yeah.
because Chanakya too was very much pro monarchy and for taking harsh, I mean, at least strong decisions in favor of maintaining the monarchy and the hold of the king over the state.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Rishi, would you like to read this section perhaps? So
Uh,
this is from
It needs to be zoomed a bit,
the
I think.
Hindi.
So
This is from the Hindi translation.
okay, okay. So I'll read from जिनका जन्म परतंत्रता में हुआ है, परंतु जो अपने पराक्रम से उस परतंत्रता का निर्जलन करते हुए अपना देश स्वतंत्र हुआ देखते हैं और स्वकर्तव्य के बलबूते पर दासता से मुक्त की हुई भूदेवी की गोद पर अपना शुभ्र मस्तक रखकर चिन्मय होते हैं, उनके हर्ष की कोई सीमा नहीं। यदि इस विषय में कुछ निर्मल सुख के क्षण हो तो
यदि इस
उनमें
विश्व
ओके यदि इस विश्व में कुछ निर्मल सुख के क्षण हो तो उनमें वह क्षण विशुद्ध सुख की चरम सीमा करने वाला होगा। जिस क्षण अपनी अत्यंत प्रिय देशजननी को असह्य पीड़ा देने वाला शत्रु मार खाते खाते देश की सीमा के बाहर दुम दबाकर भागता हुआ देखा जा सकता है। यदि निर्लेप धन्यता का कोई दिवस होगा तो वही होगा जिस दिन जननी जन्मभूमि को संपूर्ण स्वतंत्रता उपलब्ध कराते हुए देशभक्त रणभूमि से वापस लौट रहे हो और उस स्वतंत्रता के लिए एक के बाद एक शहीद हुए देश वीरों को आत्माओं को संबोधित करते हुए गर्जना कर रहे हो कि देश वीरों, अब हमारा देश स्वतंत्र हो गया है। तुम्हारे लहू की एक एक बूंद का प्रतिशोध ले लिया गया है। यह सुख और यह धन्यता जिन चंद महात्माओं के भाग्य में है, उनमें भगवान मैजिनी की गणना होती है।
You can continue from here as well. It gets interesting further down.
अगले लेख में सन 1800 आई थिंक इट्स 48 1848
हाँ
तक का
हाँ
आत्मकथात्मक वृत्तांत आया है। उसके पश्चात का वृत्तांत मैगजीनी लिखित नहीं है। सन 1800 ओके 1859 में इटली में राज्य क्रांति की दूसरी लहर चली। मैगजीनी पुनः रण में कूद पड़ा। उस समय आधे से अधिक इटली स्वतंत्र हो गई। फिर सन 1866 में वेनिस स्वतंत्र हो गया और सन 1870 में रोम स्वतंत्र हो गया। सन 1871 में उस महानायक की आंखें बहुतांशी ठंडी हो गई। संपूर्ण इटली स्वतंत्र हो गई। संपूर्ण इटली एक राष्ट्र बन गई। संपूर्ण इटली संजीव हो गई और इस स्वतंत्र एक राष्ट्रीय तथा चैतन्य युक्त इटली की राजधानी बनी रोम। सहस्र वर्षों से रोम और इटली एक दूसरे से बिछड़े हुए थे। यह वियोगावस्था, यह बिछोह समाप्त होकर इस भाग्यशाली दिन में रोम पर स्वतंत्र इटली का ध्वज लहराने लगा। 30 वर्ष पूर्व जिस रोम में जनसत्ता के प्रतिनिधित्व के अधिकार का डंका बजाया था, जिस रोम के लिए रोम 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 में मृत्यु नहीं, रोम में अशुभ नहीं, रोम मेरा प्यार है, रोम मेरे प्राण है, इस तरह सदैव पुकार होती थी। उस रोम में मैज्जिनी ने प्रवेश किया। इस समय उसके मन में किस तरह के विचार आते रहे होंगे। आखिर इटली स्वतंत्र हो गई। रोम पर स्वतंत्रता का ध्वज फहरा रहा है, और ऑस्ट्रिया के ध्वज के टुकड़े रास्ते में बच्चों के पैरों तले कुचले जा रहे हैं। यह देखकर 40 वर्ष जिसके लिए अपना कोई देश नहीं था, निर्वासित होकर दर दर की ठोकरें खानी पड़ रही थी, उस कठोर देश व्रतधारी की आंखें ठंडी हुई होगी। यही उसके विचार रहे होंगे।
So you can see the attitude of Savarkar, that he was primarily a kind of romantic, in the sense that he wanted, he was a very high glorifier of everything that happened. Even despite, actually, it goes against the traditional narrative, what actually happened, that Mazzini was disappointed uh, as to how Italy was united in the end. So uh, he was, of course, not happy in the end. He just wrote down a different conclusion itself.
That's very interesting, right? That Savarkar is totally misrepresenting even his own ideal himself at that last point.
Uh,
I guess he was insecure that such truth would deter the revolutionaries from even enacting their own objectives. So he had to censor himself.
that might be the case. Yes, that it might be also said that these were kind of rhetoric pamphlets. So,
True.
but yeah, the language was exceeding. I mean, calling Mazzini Bhagwan and so on.
Yeah, that's way too much. Like, okay, you can admire someone, but to call Bhagwan, seriously.
That we see as in a trend, as a trend even among the others, as we saw that Surendranath calls him a prophet of sorts and so on. So that was common
Totally common,
among
yeah.
basically the English educated elites, found their idols among foreigners and so on.
Oh yes.
So yes, that was Savarkar. So this is um, basically about Mazzini. So let's go back to the question that we talking about in the beginning itself. So how could a pacifist and you can say a very reactionary nationalist agree on one man? So by now, I think the viewers should have the answers to that. That Gandhi and Savarkar were not secretly agreeing on something, but it was just that they agreed on the man. They believed in the same mission of universal humanity, that nations are sacred as a God-given mission, but they also read into him personalities in their own manner. As we
Exactly.
saw that Surendranath excludes the aspect of the revolutionary explicitly,
So, because Mazzini is such a
but
layered person, one group of
hmm,
people, the moderates, emphasized on the Tyag aspect, where they emphasized on the fact that a person can go to any height just to sacrifice for the nation, and uh, yeah, to basically to give up whatever they had for the nation, to go any extra mile to benefit the nation,
pretty
while
much,
the
yes,
others the others admired the courage they showed in agitating against the government for the rights of the people. So these are I mean, the latter would be the line of thought that possibly inspired bodies like Anushilan Samiti and Savarkar and other radicals. The radicals who weren't like who believed that it was necessary to take assertive action against the government in order to
yes.
push them into a position where they would have no chance left but to grant the rights that were asked for.
So that was on Mazzini's own ambiguity. After this, so here is a question that that also came in my mind. So I put it up for the audience as well. That if he was such an influential figure for every political movement, for the all the major figures of Indian nationalism practically. So why is that most people don't hear of him anymore in our times? So the short answer is that we basically right now we are an independent country and we do not need that kind of you can say an inspiration to be unified anymore in that sense, the political sense. So that is the more immediate cause. The second cause is that India itself got its own leaders, particularly in the Congress, say Gandhi, or even many others, you can say. And
And also
third,
the fact that, well, the term fascism has become such a taboo in most political circles in India, at least. And fascism having been associated with Mussolini, and Mussolini also
yes,
having been famously inspired by Mazzini. Mazzini became an inconvenient word for those who are trying to disassociate themselves from fascism as far as possible. So they didn't want
very
to be
true.
viewed as fascist.
And finally, there was the aspect that revolutionaries all across the world became at some point similar to the socialists. This is because
Mm.
the you can say the first successful revolution was the Russian Revolution. That is the reason that all began to look at the Russians for inspiration, particularly Lenin and the likes, who actually
Why
ran a
Lenin?
revolution
Even
and became the
even Tolstoy is much way more famous. Like people openly quote their inspiration from Tolstoy. Both Gandhi and Nelson Mandela have been famously inspired
But
by
I'm
Tolstoy.
talking about revolutionaries. So
I see.
Lenin was
Yes.
a proper the gun carrying revolutionary, do actually won power as well through his methods. So that in that manner, all revolutionaries became socialists to a point
If I'm not
because they saw
mistaken,
the success
Tolstoy
of the
is.
Russians.
Also, Niner, I want to ask you, as far as I know, Mazzini wasn't giving any intellectual framework as robust as these socialists were giving at that time, right? Like how
Precisely.
Lenin
Yep,
was a writer of various books, especially on imperialism. Especially those writings were very famous within the younger generation in India. Rajendra Lahiri and so on have read those
their
texts a lot.
framework was very well developed by that time. The you can say they were coinciding with the workers' movements. There was a lot of industrialization, so workers were also lending them support and so on. Unionization, everything basically went in favor of the communists and left. So they took
True.
over the revolutionaries.
I mean, so much so we know. At least I do not know. Maybe you can fact check me. But Savarkar met Lenin, right, in London.
Yes, he
There
met
is,
Lenin.
yeah. So
They
this
did
was the
meet
case.
Lenin
Hmm.
in London. London, sorry.
So basically, Mazzini became sort of a romantic, idealistic figure at last. Only good for remembering
Pretty
him
much.
in times of distress and all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely.
So that is why after the point of you can say 1920s and 30s, you hear barely about him anymore. So he had his age in the early revolutionary period, and the time when moderates were dominant, and a little bit among some of the you can say Gandhians and so on. But later, yes, he faded out very quickly.
Yeah, and we also had so many other movements, right, in India, like Khilafat and so on. So people had to find other ways to manage those things as well. And Mazzini was lacking in those parts.
Yep.
Yeah, the
So
last
yes,
point. That's good. Broken one.
which one?
Broken. Mazzini's whole appeal was unification.
So that partition also delivered the opposite of this. So when we were
Exactly. So the purpose was failed in a way
independent, we
because
kind of
unification
failed.
wasn't
Yes.
achieved.
Yep.
We went through
Pretty
partition
much.
after partition, and we couldn't hold on to most. I mean, many key pieces of our mainland. So yes, and that made it very clear that, I mean, we weren't really as unified a lot as Mazzini wanted or Mazzini's followers wanted to make us. And we do see that Congress did initially emphasize a lot on holding the country together. I mean, Congress has, I mean, the Mazzini influence section of the Congress had had emphasized on holding the country together for a very long time, as long as they
In
walked
a sense,
Mazzini's
the you
path.
can say the stream of Congress, which was while also participating in Gandhianism, they were also that kind of nationalists. They were the eh, pretty much the last upholders of
Precisely.
Mazzini's ideology, in a sense. They were very liberal. They were, you can say, very open-minded and so on.
But yes,
In
Jinnah
that
and
same manner,
British policy came as out of syllabus questions. So yeah,
pretty much.
So just like Mazzini, idealism always gets defeated by realistic politics.
I mean, we can even call Jinnah. Not just us. People have called Jinnah a Mazzini for Pakistan because he wanted a united Pakistan. But again, even Bangladesh split out of Pakistan, so even Pakistan couldn't be kept united. So yeah,
Hmm. Yes, so that is there. Moving on. So, as the last point that we want to discuss before we wrap up, so we want to discuss the net effect of Mazzini. So, what did the whole story of Mazzini's influence actually give India, and what did it end up costing? On the gain side, in my opinion, these are entirely my opinions. The audience can also add their thoughts in the comments. So the most important thing was that Mazzini gave us a kind of vocabulary for the nationalism that we wanted. The framing of the patriotism towards the country as a duty, that we had a grievance against a foreign occupational force, that we had to have organizations to build youth movements, and most importantly, a kind of sense of unity. That was a real sense that might have been actually useful to us in the point of time that we actually needed. On the
precisely.
risk side, there are a couple of different things that we could point out. So first, there's of course the sacred nation language, that from the belief that what do you say,
God
that
has crafted the nation.
uh, Indian nationalism itself serves humanity, that it presents itself as an inclusive and non-sectarian kind of view, right? And it looks very wholesome from the from a normie kind of worldview. That it's a very romantic view as well of that you resist and you want to unite all of us. But on practice in the ground, people are very split apart. They're very pluralist, and that is why nationalism lost to the Muslim League in the end. So yes, that is a quite a mixed legacy we have here.
We have
Any
some good
thoughts on this?
questions here. We have some good questions here that we could take up.
We can probably. Any final thoughts, Dr. Bennett and Rishi? Then we can take the questions.
Okay, so nationalism itself as a religion became outproduct, right? One of the consequences of Mazzini that happened in India.
Yes.
We see some sort of corollary with Hindutva as well, right? When Mazzini is talking about Italy being created by God, as if God with his finger has created the Alps mountains as the boundaries, and below it's a sea. So this patch of land is totally isolated from rest landmass as well. Therefore, Italy should protect it, and should be creating a nation out of it at all costs and whatsoever. This sort of similar lingo even came with Savarkar as well, right? When he talks about Ao Sindhu Sindhu Paryantam Yasya Bharata Bhumika, those kind of language where he, although as an atheist, he did not mention any god, but he mentioned um, historio anthropological reasons for it, like when he says that nature created this landmass, and people residing near Sindhu who were Hindus, they created ultimately the bedrock of the nation. Therefore, this nation should be protected. So that sort of religio politico ideology came into our own vocabulary as well, right? Where now the scene is as such that nationalism is much more above than any even moral questions as well. I've seen at least that within people.
True.
Yeah, pretty much. That I would agree with entirely.
On the second point, a working template for youth organization, this became a very important uh, product, I think, from like in getting inspired from Mazzini and creating youth specific organizations across India. In fact, this phenomenon should be appreciated. I think it's a good product that came out of that sort of inspiration. But as you have noted over here as well, that these kinds of movements also create cuckoo organizations as well, and some sort of militant organizations also came up because of it, which were
Precisely.
not at all
The
yes.
my sum was of it was that they are kind of these romantic nationalists. They seek to unite all forces while ignoring realities and not being realist in their
And of
expectations.
course, I mean, Freemasons also ran roughshod in some parts of India. You never know. I mean,
True.
such movements may have also been
The,
inspired
they
by,
were, yeah.
because we have Freemason buildings in Lahore and so on. So such
like even
instances
in
are clearly documented.
even in remote places like Silchar, we had Masonic societies. Like, think about it.
So yes, they took this secretive covert activity thing very seriously.
Indeed. And the last one, the fragmentation should be counteracted, and a united nation should be seen as a goal and should be uh, worked upon as so on. This also
Became the template
another,
for globalization.
yep, the mobilization for a united nation. This is also a good point, I guess, which we adopted. But at some point, I guess we became very latrical, I guess, with regards to, like, we had to force fit our nation into some sort of a box to make sense out of it, despite the reality being India is actually so plural, and we must be actually going towards a framework where such pluralism is celebrated rather than rejected. But I guess this was abhorrent to nationalists, even as we see. By the way, can we refer to social reform as well that we had as an outproduct from the influence of Mazzini, an inner patriot?
Social reform, I did mention the question of caste, right? That
Mhm.
was a bit similar. Apart from that, uh, because I probably think that
And
they
we
don't
do know that
also have the
Savarkar
need.
did have, like, he did have some firm views on caste dynamics. So yes, it's possible
Ah,
that he could have
so
adopted those from
the
Mazzini as well.
Indians who read him would have definitely interpreted caste in their own social reformist manner. But
Precisely.
apart from that, Mazzini was not really a
But
separatist,
again,
I
I
would
mean,
say.
Savarkar himself may have also intended that. So we know that much.
Because
Even
why I was referring to Mazzini in with regards to social reform. It's because in one of his writings, he says he like chastises pope, bishops, cardinals, monarchs as hoarders of privileges and so on, and therefore the mass is totally impoverished and they need liberty and so on, which is being
so, yeah.
stopped by these people and so on. Which is why I thought.
Savarkar is pretty clear about how he wants to present it. So his readers gain exactly that impression.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay,
So let's take up the
let's get
question
it.
because we
Yep.
have some good questions here.
We can take up the questions now. Kindly touch on the topic of how Mussolini was betrayed and deposed and what led to Italy betraying the Axis and joining the Allies.
Did this happen in this manner?
I
Uh, there, some what I understand, I do not know exactly what happened to lead to the cause of Mussolini's government, but I know about the generic things that the Allies they defeated the Italians in Greece in Greece particularly. They had defeated the Italians in some disastrous battles for the Italians, so they had to retreat back to Italy practically, and the Allies were able to advance as far as Sicily. So at that point, the king of Italy, uh, he himself removed Mussolini from power, and they had him arrested, and some other people came in power in those days.
okay. So that answers your question. Otherwise, we might
That
take up a
yeah,
future video of
we, we
video to
don't
discuss
we
some.
don't know in detail much about this,
Exactly.
and it's not related to the topic.
Precisely. And there has been some information. Okay, information on AOU. Okay,
Indian nationalism was based on
Italian,
Italian.
Italian.
Oh,
Yeah.
at some point, commented by more relevant towards current issues. Yes, if you can elaborate on which later works you're talking about, we can probably discuss them
I think
specifically.
he's talking about those
Otherwise,
lectures, right? In uh, So in volume 9 of Prabhat Prakashan's Savarkar Samagra, there is this whole section about his lecture tours across India where he gives lectures on Urdu and
oh, right.
the whole communal
Those are
politics.
much more on political topics, as we can probably
Hmm.
guess. As we have seen those, yes, those are much more on political topics.
True. And I guess those will remain in India always relevant.
Yes, yes. On that, the debate and discussion should continue as well. A lot of different opinions are there on that anyway.
But on this Abrahamic value issue, I think Mazzini Mazzini has this whole progressive historiography, right, where he talks about how pagans did talk about liberty, but they did not know about equality, and they were like making groups and all.
Yes, he actually thinks in that same manner in which you can say liberals think, which
Hmm.
is also an advancement of Abrahamic thinking that polytheism precedes monotheism, and monotheism is a virtue, and monotheism brings us to a more enlightened version of a state of things, which is the present state of things that Mazzini subscribed to.
True. And I guess the only caveat will be both of you can please comment on this. At least that's what I interpreted reading Mazzini, that he, since he's not a Christian, quote unquote, he sees Christianity as a religion only interpreting his deistic God's commands in a progressive manner in history. That's all that
Yes,
he sees within Christianity, right?
very much so. And he sees Jesus as probably just the highest of the saints, in a sense, which represents who represents his views in the most best manner.
Hmm. Very different from our guys, at least. I don't know if they. I guess they omitted those portions of Mazzini a lot
Hmm.
in their own writings.
One line of thought could be that our Indian nationalists even took up the Abrahamic values to influence their nationalism. That must be kept in mind. We were not
Damn.
entirely devoid of influence.
Damn.
Bringing up Mazzini itself, who was such a committed deist, referring to God all over his work, that influence certainly had its own place.
I guess so. Yeah, if there are any other comments as well. Oh no, this is the same one. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that is pretty much it.
yeah, I guess
Any
so.
final thoughts on this?
Nothing I can think
I
of.
mean,
We have a guest giving us some lines on AO Hume, but yeah, those are just statements from what I can see.
oh, okay, okay, okay.
Ah, okay, okay. Yeah, I think yeah, that is not a it's not a related topic as
Mhm.
such. So
Yeah,
yes, moving on to the final slide. So we just leave you with the numbers here that 1861, Italy was independent, 1947, India was independent, and almost 100 years apart. Yet we see a figure who inspired one, which
Almost
the
all
other
streams of thought
country
in India, all streams of political thought, like
pretty much
radicals,
in the manner he
moderates.
talked about duty, about nation, about sacrifice and society, and so on. So, and we found a different contradictory streams of thought also admiring him. And we also found out exactly why they were admiring him. So, yes, thank you so much for listening. And if you do have any questions, do leave in the comments. We shall reply to them later.
yeah. And
Thank
please
you.
like and subscribe and share it with your friends as well.
Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.